I've always been interested in beer, and I've always been interested in good beer and cask beer, possibly in my earlier life, not from a technical aspect, but I enjoyed the pub scene and actually realised the beers that I liked weren't necessarily the yellow, cold and fizzy. I enjoyed the more complex beers. I like the cask conditioned beers. My name's Roger Ryman. I'm brewing director at St Austell Brewery. I'm currently sitting in the 7 Stars Inn. This was Walter Hicks's original pub. The company goes back to 1851. It was founded by a gentleman called Walter Hicks, a Cornishman. In 1851, he mortgaged his farm and he set himself up in business and actually opened his first pub. The company continued to grow and he moved to the current brewery in 1893, which is where we still brew all of the beers today. If you want to make beer, you only need 4 ingredients. That's water, barley, hops and yeast. And it's one of the great things with beer actually is that there's so much diversity from only 4 raw materials. Right, where we are right now, this is the mill room, so this is the start of the brewing process. This is right at the top of the brewery tower. So the first thing we have to do before we can brew with our malted barley is we have to mill it. Milling it basically just involves cracking the corn, opening it up, so that when we mash it in the next stage, the water or the liquor can access the inside of the grain to extract the sugar. Inside each corn of barley there is starch, and we need to access that starch and break that starch down to make sugar. Before the barley can come to the brewery to be used for brewing beer, it has to be malted. Malting basically liberates the sugars within the barley. So the barley, when it's harvested from the farm, is full of starch. The malt is the heart and soul of the beer. So we can get sweet, toffee, caramel, nutty, roasted flavours that come from using the different types of malt. Well, this is our brew house. So each batch of beer, we brew roughly 175 brewers barrels on a brew. So in language that most people understand, that's around about 55,000 pints of beer. So that is one single batch of beer. That takes 4.3 tonnes of malted barley, and we have to mix that crushed malted barley with hot water, or as brewers say, hot liquor. In this vessel, the mash tun, and it's here where we're actually going to infuse and extract the sugar out of the barley. Each brew takes around about 8 hours from raw material, from the barley through to the finished wort and fermentation. It then takes a further 7 days to ferment. In each 24-hour period, we make 3 different brews in this brew house, so we can make over 150,000 pints of beer every 24-hour period. The mash comes out looking like a thick porridge. It falls into this vessel and it rests in here for 60 minutes, and during that time, from the barley, we infuse and extract all of the sugar and the colour and the flavour that's going to go into our final beer. So we add the hops in here, we bring the wort to the boil, and we boil it for 1 hour and 15 minutes. And during this process, we are purging off raw aromas from the grain, we're extracting the flavour out of the hops, and importantly, we're also sterilising the wort. Historically, over the years, brewers have flavoured beers with all sorts of botanicals, and if you look through historical brewing records back into medieval times, they used to produce beers called Groot, and Groot was flavoured with all sorts of herbs, spices and different botanicals. It's a great thing to research some of these ancient brewing recipes and to try and recreate some of these beers. We have looked at different spices in brewing beer over the years. We've brewed with licorice, we've brewed with, there's a spice called Grains of Paradise, we've brewed with orange peel, with all sorts of things. We've brewed with chocolate, chili chocolate, we made a stout with chili chocolate. We made a strawberry lager. We've made honey beers, we brewed with honey. Coffee beans, made a stout with coffee beans. Well, this is a fermentation room. It takes us 8 hours to brew each batch of beer, but then it takes a further 7 days to ferment. So each one of these vessels will hold 1 brew of beer from the brew house. So we have, I've lost count of how many vessels we've got. Let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 18 different fermentation vessels. This is over 100 years old. We've got one down here that's even older. Yeah, we've got a real mix of old and new in here. The vessel behind me is around about 1912. It's made out of kauri pine, which is New Zealand pine, and traditionally this was a material of construction for brewery vessels back in those days, because what they were trying to get was long lengths of timber without knots in the wood for hygiene reasons. At this point in the process, hygiene becomes absolutely critical. We add the yeast, and during that time, the yeast will feed on the sugars, converting the sugars into alcohol. There's hundreds of different types of yeast. I mean, there's probably as many different types of yeast as there are people on the planet, to be perfectly honest. Ales are what we call top fermenting. So during the fermentation, the yeast will rise to the surface, and we will skim the yeast from the surface of the brew. Historically, that was done with this sluice gate here. So they would actually open, raise and lower this to the surface of the beer, and then just paddle the surface yeast away from the beer over this sluice gate. Lagers are bottom fermenting, so during the fermentation, the yeast will drop to the bottom of the vessel. We've been brewing beer here for 160 years, but we've never brewed lager before, and it's something that I've been playing around with over 10 years, and I think part of it really was as much the technical challenge. I wanted to know that I could. You know, I've been an ale brewer for many years, but brewing a really good premium high quality lager was one challenge that I hadn't really taken on, and the techniques are a little bit different. Lagers have to be very, very delicate. Any flavour deviation is immediately apparent, so you've got to be technically very, very proficient. You're also working at lower temperatures, which means that the yeast can be a little bit more temperamental. But I've been delighted with Korev and the success of it. It's been launched for just over 12 months, and it's been a phenomenal success for us. And I think the time is right for good quality, locally produced lagers with great flavour and real local values. Yeah, so cask conditioned beer is really beer in its most natural and unadulterated form. So cask conditioned beer spends 7 days in the fermentation vessels, and then it's pumped from the fermentation vessels to what we call a racking tank. It's simply a holding tank, and then from there we fill it directly into the casks. So the casks come back from the pubs. We have to take all the bungs out of the casks. They go through a washer so that we wash out any of the old beer that's been in there, rinse them with hot water, sterilise them, and then we refill them with the next batch of beer. The bottling line was installed in 2009. Bottled beer is a big growth part of our business. Having control of our own process, our own quality means that our bottled beer is better than it's ever been, and the awards that it's won really reflect that. I think two of the awards that I'm most proud of are for the bottled beers. So we installed our bottling line in 2009. In 2010, we were awarded Champion Bottled Beer of Britain with Admiral's Ale, and we actually followed that up the following year by receiving the same award for Proper Job, which I think is the first time any brewery has had back-to-back champion bottled beers, so we're delighted with that. When I joined the brewery, and I remember clearly the day, it's 6th of April 1999, I was given a task to brew a seasonal beer for that summer's solar eclipse in Cornwall. I still have the original brew sheet, actually, which I brewed on the 23rd of April 1999, and that beer was the beer that went on to become Tribute. It's lighter in colour, it's slightly fuller, it's not so bitter, but it's got a real characteristic fruity late hop flavour. So it's a much more contemporary style of beer. I remember very clearly the week of the eclipse getting very excited because we had to do a second brew of Tribute that week. Amazingly, we had to do a second brew. We now brew 6 or 7 or 8 brews every week, but at the time, doing a second brew was actually quite exciting, and that was the point that we realised we had something here that people wanted to drink. The beer that I'm really excited about actually is Korev. I think the great thing about Korev is it's a new category. Tribute is a great cask conditioned beer, but now we've got a great lager as well. So actually it's a whole new category, and Korev I think is just at the start of a great journey. We actually had to ration it in the springtime last year, shortly after we launched it, because we were so astounded with the demand that we simply hadn't brewed enough of it. So Trelawney's it's an amber ale, a bit of caramel and toffee, and it's quite a delicious beer and really drinkable. HSD is probably one of our most classic beers. It's got a really nice deep copper, tawny brown colour to it. It's characterised by malt, so we've got really nice crystal, caramel, toffee, nutty flavours coming through in the beer. Admiral's Ale, certainly in 2008, was awarded the Supreme Champion at the International Beer Competition. So that was the champion of champions, which was, phenomenal. Yeah, Proper Job's a slightly drier palate than other beers. It's slightly more bitter, but it has a really big, distinctive, fruity hop flavour. When I joined the brewery, we were producing roughly 16,000 barrels of beer a year. My ambition was to get the brewery up to 25,000 barrels of beer, and we've just brewed 80,000 barrels of beer a year. Even in my wildest dreams, I would have anticipated the degree of success that we've had. Some of our other beers, Proper Job, are actually exported. So there is a bar in Perth, Australia, where you can drink Proper Job. We know we brew good beer, but it's nice that other people tell us that as well. I love the beers that we brew. I drink our beer in pubs, and I know when it's right, and there's nothing more satisfying than going out and having a pint of beer that's come from this brewery, from my team, and it being absolutely superb, and that is the ultimate enjoyment.